The thing that I find interesting is that obviously on the show we've talked a lot about realignment. It's March, it's happening. We don't know what the sport's going to look like, in 10, 7, 2 hours. I don't know. But a lot of the comments on the side I've noticed is, what does this mean for Notre Dame? What does this mean for Notre Dame? What does this mean for Notre Dame? And I think that means for you is that you're going to be in realignment purgatory forever. So until they join a conference or this settles down for the next, 10-year gap before it all blows up again, you're just going to be in this constant state of what does this mean for Notre Dame? And, we got a lot of this discussion out there, last summer when, the UCLA and the USC was going on, and now we're kind of ramping back up again. So has anything, Pete, changed this time?
Not really. It's like the Notre Dame realignment conversation. I think it's important to distinguish between like how Notre Dame can view it and how almost everyone else can view it. Like for UCLA, realignment and a lot of these Pac-12 schools, that's like life or death. Notre Dame can sort of just sit back and observe and see how things shake out and then make whatever decision is best for Notre Dame, because it's not like we're going to be in a spot where they can call the Big Ten next week, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and the Big Ten is going to give them a different answer than they would today. And that's, yes, please come. We will take you right now. Whenever you want to come in, you can come in. So I think Notre Dame's point of view is like, all right, is college football really moving to the Power Two? Because it sure seems like it is. And if it does, then you probably have to be a part of that. Not right. necessarily for access to the playoff, but just the financials of it. Like the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be making so much money that I think that's probably what Notre Dame is monitoring now more than ever before. Is just like, all right, what's the financial bottom line on this? Because not that Notre Dame would need it to survive, but man, that would be a really attractive proposition if you're joining the Big Ten alongside like an Oregon and a Washington to go with UCLA and USC. That just would mean something totally different than joining a conference ever would have meant before.
Yeah, I think that the most interesting dynamic of this latest round of realignment is that it's not necessarily people getting amped up about where are we going to play or who our opponent's going to be and access to the playoff. I think there's a large concern from a lot of fans of just self-preservation as being relevant in the sport. And Notre Dame obviously is the brand of its own, and I don't know that it has those same concerns, but I do know that the discussion points are probably going to shift from, well, could we still get into the playoff, to is the whatever TV deal that we're going to end up getting, was it in 2025?
Yeah.
Is that going to be able to keep us on pace? Like, so if you're a Oregon or a Washington where you might be worried about attaching yourself to a relevant conference long term or finding your way into the Big Two when it inevitably gets there, like, what do you think Notre Dame's number one concern is? Is it being a part of that world, that super conference world, or is it making sure that whatever the outcome of this latest round is, or when the future becomes clear, that they are financially viable?
Much more on the financial side of things. And so that's like, they have the NBC deal will be coming up a year and a half from now. Can they take that deal to something comparable to what the Big Ten and the SEC are getting? Not the same, but just like in the ballpark. Can you get NBC to essentially double what they're paying for Notre Dame right now? Just sort of move off of what is perceived to be kind of a sweetheart deal, where Notre Dame sort of is paying sort of like kicking back a premium because they like the exclusivity of the national contract. It makes them different. Notre Dame likes to be different. But at some point you gotta make the money. And Notre Dame's sort of at that point now where it's like, you can't be getting lapped multiple times over by Purdue and Vanderbilt in terms of media rights, because they're part of the Big Ten and the SEC. So I think Notre Dame will get through the next NBC deal. NBC will come up on that because it's now that NBC is a little bit more into the college football space with the Big Ten package on Saturday night. That's something Notre Dame welcomed because it sort of showed NBC was willing to invest in college football in a way that, maybe they hadn't before or didn't need to before. So that's sort of the next thing for Notre Dame. It's less about access to the playoff, because like when your own AD is part of the committee that designed the new playoff, like I think by definition you like the new playoff because you came up with it yourself if you're Notre Dame. But the media rights package, that's where Notre Dame needs to come up, and they need NBC to sort of come up with them.
I almost feel like if they were to hit freeze on realignment now, like it was just like stop with the new playoff, if they get a great, sweet little TV deal coming up, that this is like Notre Dame Nirvana, because now they no longer have to go undefeated to make the playoff. They can probably have a really sweet deal, and like they could exist in this current space for a long time, I think. The thing that would be concerning to me is, and Dave Ubben brought this up in the other show that we had last week about it, was will there be a time where the Big Ten and the SEC have 16, 18, 20 teams each, and then they turn into the AFC and NFC, and then they only play against each other and schedule each other, and then there's a second tier of college football that's no longer a part of that system. So, like, to me, if I were Notre Dame, who I think unequivocally belongs in that fake world, like, is there a self-preservation act to just make sure that you remain relevant, not just financially viable, but relevant within the context of who they play? And I'm assuming that if it ever got to that point that Notre Dame would knock on the door. But I think that it's an interesting discussion because you want to put yourself in a position where you make sure that you are with your peers.
Yeah, I think it's less about the scheduling aspect of it, because like Notre Dame is going to make you money if you schedule them, and these conferences are about nothing else but making money. So they're not going to cut off their nose to spite their face over Notre Dame with scheduling. But if the financials of the Big Ten are so far in front of what the ACC and the Big Ten, like that's another thing with like the ACC, when Notre Dame makes less money being independent with the ACC than they would if they were all in. Like financially, they would be better off if they were all in for the ACC with media rights. And then you think about what Clemson and Florida State are saying, like the ACC is not viable. We have to get the hell out of here. So Notre Dame is less than that. So that's sort of where they are financially. They're like a cut below what the ACC is. But if you get to a point where, okay, what are unlimited scholarships? I don't want to get too far into the weeds of like the financials, like, NIL packages. Do players become more employees? And like the Big Ten can offer a scholarship that is just far and away different than what Notre Dame or the ACC schools could, because they have so much more incoming cash flow. That's to me like what I would have to be wary of if I was Notre Dame. If like a Big Ten scholarship just means something different than a scholarship to somebody else. That's right. I think it's much more of a financial story to monitor if you're Notre Dame than it is like a competitive one. And that doesn't even get into like, all right, how much can you pay your coaches? How much can you pay your support staff? Like if you're going to have 32 analysts like Alabama, you got to pay them. Notre Dame is not in that spot. And if they join the Big Ten, conceivably they could be.
So there's no scheduling concerns for you?
I don't think so, because what? Michigan is not going to want to play Notre Dame. Ohio State's not going to want to play Notre Dame because, there's going to be non-conference games still. I don't think we're going to get to a point where the Big Ten is playing 12 conference games. So as long as there's one or two.
What if the non-conference games are exclusively against SEC teams and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean that's what the playoff.
And that's not going to happen,
right?
But that's not going to happen in the next 10 years, probably.
No, I think that Notre Dame's good with that, and the idea of Big Ten schools being like, we're actually going to blackball Notre Dame like Fielding Yost style over scheduling. I just can't see that happening because there's too much money to be made.
Because that's the thing with NBC too. It's like you almost, as you are buying into this property, depending on how long-term that television deal is, I would be a little nervous that scheduling would become more complicated.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at from NBC's point of view. It's like, all right, we've got this deal with Notre Dame that we've had for 30 years, and now we're with the Big Ten. You know what would be really great? If Notre Dame and the Big Ten played more, because that's free property for us on NBC, or extra property, not free. They're paying for it, but every Notre Dame Ohio State game being an NBC property, yeah, I think that NBC is going to be make that turn out okay. Yeah, they're going to kill it on that. Or every NBC or every Notre Dame Michigan game being an NBC property, home or away, they're going to kill it on that. So Notre Dame just makes too much money for other people to say, like, you know what, forget it. We have to have an extra Big Ten game because Iowa, Minnesota is just that important. Like that's not happening. I think Notre Dame is still in that mix because they bring money to the table.